I still remember the exact weight of the afternoon before everything changed. Not the temperature, not the hour, the weight. The kind of pressure that settles on the skin before a storm, even when the sky is painfully bright. Riverfront Market was crowded that day. Families moved between cars with paper bags pressed against their chests. A delivery truck groaned near the loading bay. Shopping carts clicked against cracked asphalt. Somewhere behind me, a child laughed over something small and ordinary. I had come there for coffee, almonds, a bottle of sparkling water. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that should have followed me into a federal courtroom years later through sealed exhibits and sworn testimony and a sentencing memorandum that would mention 25 years as though a number could hold the full shape of a ruined lie. I was wearing a navy suit, low heels. My court badge was inside my leather bag beneath a folded copy of a judicial ethics speech I had delivered that morning. I remember that detail because later people would ask why I did not identify myself immediately. They would ask why I did not say who I was when Officer Derek Hayes stepped beside my car and told me to keep my hands where he could see them. What would you have done? Would you have reached for proof while a man with a weapon had already decided what kind of woman you were? Would you have gambled your life on the belief that authority always recognizes authority when it wears the wrong face? I did not reach. I did not argue. I let my hands remain still against the side of my sedan. The sun struck the windshield hard enough to turn the glass white. His reflection appeared beside mine. Tall, uniform pressed, jaw tight, one hand resting near his belt. His eyes moved over my suit, my hair, my bag, my skin, then back to the open door of my car. He asked if the vehicle belonged to me. I said yes. He asked why I was nervous. I said I was not. That answer irritated him in a way I understood immediately. I have spent much of my life inside rooms where tone becomes evidence long before facts arrive. Courtrooms teach you that some people hear calmness as defiance. Others hear silence as guilt. Officer Hayes heard both. He told me there had been reports of suspicious activity in the parking lot. He told me to step away from the vehicle. I did. Slowly, without reaching for anything, without changing my voice. My groceries remained in the passenger seat. A receipt curled from one paper bag. My coffee sweated in the cup holder. The whole scene was almost absurd in its ordinariness. And maybe that was what made it frightening. Nothing around us warned the world that a life could be tilted on its axis in less than 5 minutes. No music, no dramatic shadow, just sunlight, asphalt, a badge, a woman being watched. He asked if I had anything illegal in the car. I said no. He asked if I would consent to a search. I asked whether I was free to leave. His mouth tightened. That was the moment his performance changed. He was no longer asking. He was arranging. He stepped closer and lowered his voice just enough that only I could hear the contempt beneath the procedure. He said people like me always thought a good outfit made them invisible. I looked at him, not because I was shocked, because I wanted to remember his face clearly. I wanted to remember the exact shape of the choice he was making while he still believed it belonged only to him. Can you imagine that silence? The silence after someone tells you exactly who they are while pretending to enforce the law? I did not answer his insult. I asked again whether I was being detained. He smiled then, a small controlled smile, the kind that never reaches the eyes. He said I was making this harder than it needed to be. Behind him, a woman loading groceries paused with one hand on her trunk. A man near the cart returned slowed down. 2 teenagers looked up from their phones. Attention gathered the way smoke gathers near a ceiling. Soft at first, then visible. Officer Hayes noticed too. He straightened his shoulders and raised his voice. He told me to place my bag on the hood. I placed my bag on the hood. He told me to step back. I stepped back. He told me not to make sudden moves. I made none. Every instruction became part of a record he did not know he was building. Every word, every gesture, every unnecessary escalation. I remember thinking of my mother then. Not dramatically, not with tears, just a flash of her hands smoothing my graduation robe decades earlier. She had said, "Facts do not panic. Facts do not run. Facts wait." I had repeated those words to clerks, to young attorneys, to defendants who looked at the bench as though justice were a language they had never been taught. Facts wait. So I waited. Officer Hayes opened my driver's door wider. He leaned inside without permission that had ever truly been given. He moved slowly at first, then confidently, too confidently. He checked the center console, the floor mat, the space beside the seat. He looked once toward me as though measuring my reaction. I gave him nothing. No widened eyes. No protest. No trembling mouth. That seemed to bother him more than any argument would have. He opened the back door, looked beneath a folded blazer, shifted a tote bag. Then he walked around to the passenger side. The crowd had grown by then. Perhaps 20 people. Maybe more. Phones had started rising. People record pain so easily now. Sometimes out of concern. Sometimes for spectacle. Sometimes because they know truth needs witnesses and they do not trust memory to survive authority. I did not know which kind of witnesses they were yet. I only knew they were there. Officer Hayes bent into the passenger side for a few seconds. His body blocked the view. When he emerged, he was holding a small, clear bag between gloved fingers. White powder clung inside it like a dirty little secret. A gasp moved through the parking lot. It was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was collective. The sound of strangers revising you in real time. He held the bag higher. Just high enough for the crowd. Just high enough for the phones. Then he looked at me with satisfaction, so naked it almost felt careless. He said, "Once this is tested, your life is over." The words moved across the asphalt and reached everyone. I saw suspicion bloom on faces that had known nothing about me 30 seconds earlier. A woman pulled her child closer. The man by the cart returned shook his head. Someone whispered that I looked so professional too. That word too landed inside me with a dull, familiar force. Professional too. Calm too. Educated too. As if dignity in a black woman's body is always treated as a costume waiting to be removed. I looked at the bag, then at him. There is nothing to explain. That was all I said. He expected more. He expected panic. He expected me to spill fear onto the pavement so he could point to it as confirmation. But fear is not a legal argument. Fear is not evidence. Fear only feeds men who are hungry for surrender. He asked if I wanted to change my answer. I said no. He asked if the drugs were mine. I said no. He asked how they got there. I said I would like counsel present for further questioning. His expression shifted. Not much. Enough. The crowd heard me ask for counsel. That mattered. He heard it too. For a moment the parking lot became strangely quiet. The automatic doors of the market opened behind the crowd and released a burst of cold air into the heat. Somewhere a cart will squeaked. Officer Hayes laughed softly. He said counsel would not help me. He said the evidence was in my car. He said witnesses saw everything. I wondered which witnesses he meant. The woman at the trunk who had only turned around after his voice rose. The teenagers who had been watching a video before they watched me. The delivery driver who had stepped down from his truck after the bag appeared. Lies often borrow witnesses after the fact. They point to confusion and call it corroboration. I had seen that technique in suppression hearings. In affidavits. In polished testimony that collapsed under one clean timestamp. But in that parking lot, I was not on the bench. I was the accused. That distinction is thinner than most people want to believe. Officer Hayes told me to turn around. I did. He told me to put my hands behind my back. I did. The metal cuffs closed around my wrists with a sound I had heard in my courtroom hundreds of times. A small mechanical bite. Final to the person wearing them. Routine to the person holding the key. I felt the heat of the hood near my hip. I felt sweat gather beneath my collar. I felt every phone aimed at my back. And still I did not tell him I was Judge Vanessa Coleman of the United States District Court. Not yet. You may wonder why. You may think identity should have saved me. But identity is not armor when someone is committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes revealing power too early only teaches a corrupt man which evidence to bury first. So I let him speak. I let him narrate. I let him build the lie in public. He told the crowd to step back. He told them this was an active narcotics investigation. He told them nobody understood what officers deal with every day. His voice had become official now, heavy with practiced injury. He was no longer just arresting me. He was asking the public to join him in feeling wronged by my composure. He read me my rights with theatrical precision, then placed me beside his cruiser while another patrol unit rolled into the lot. The second officer was younger. Officer Martin. I would learn his name later through reports. He looked uneasy from the moment he arrived. His eyes moved from me to Hayes, then to the evidence bag, then to the crowd. He asked Hayes something too quietly for others to hear. Hayes answered sharply. Procedure. Probable cause. Suspicious conduct. Those were the words I caught. Beautiful words when honestly used. Dangerous words when turned into a curtain. Officer Martin nodded but did not look convinced. He asked if my vehicle had been secured before the search. Hayes said yes. He asked whether body camera footage had captured the recovery. Hayes looked at him for half a second too long, then said enough. I saw it. A hesitation so small most people would miss it. Judges are trained to see hinges. The little point where a story opens. My wrists ached. I shifted my fingers to restore circulation. Hayes noticed and told me not to move. I stilled. The crowd watched. Some looked troubled now. My calmness had begun to disturb the simplicity of his accusation. People know panic. They know denial. They know anger. Calm compliance makes them uncomfortable because it denies them the emotional evidence they expect. A young reporter stood near the edge of the crowd with a press badge hanging from her neck. She had come from the office complex across the street. I recognized the station logo. She stared at me with the searching expression of someone trying to place a face. I looked away before recognition could arrive. Not because I wanted secrecy forever, because timing mattered. In court, timing can preserve truth. Too early, and the room resists. Too late, and the lie hardens. I needed Officer Hayes to finish showing everyone what he believed he could do when he thought nobody important was watching. He placed the evidence bag on the hood of his cruiser. Then he began filling out a field report on his tablet. He spoke aloud while typing. Female subject. Narcotics recovered from vehicle. Non-compliant during questioning. I turned my head slightly. Non-compliant. The word almost made me smile. I had complied with every physical command, but I had refused the role he wrote for me. That was the violation. He asked for my name. I gave it. Vanessa Coleman. He typed without reaction. Either he did not know it or pretended not to. He asked for my occupation. I said federal employee. His mouth curled. He said that was convenient. The young reporter's head lifted. Federal employee. Vanessa Coleman. I saw the pieces begin moving behind her eyes. Officer Hayes did not. He was too busy enjoying the version of the story where I was already destroyed. He asked what agency. I said the judiciary. The reporter's lips parted slightly. Hayes paused, then looked up. The judiciary. I said yes. He asked what I did there. His tone was mocking now. Clerk? Administrative assistant? Security? Each option was offered like a little cage. I looked directly at him. I said I serve on the federal bench. The parking lot changed before anyone spoke. Silence did not fall all at once. It tightened, the way air tightens before glass breaks. Officer Hayes stared at me. The young reporter looked down at her phone with shaking speed. Officer Martin went still. A man in the crowd repeated federal bench under his breath. Hayes recovered first. He scoffed and said that impersonating a judge was another serious problem. I almost admired the commitment. Almost. He had reached the edge of retreat and chosen escalation instead. That choice would follow him all the way to the indictment. I said nothing. The reporter stepped forward with her phone in hand. She did not shout. She did not make a speech. She simply looked from the screen to my face and whispered, "Oh my God." Then louder, "That is Judge Vanessa Coleman. Federal Judge Vanessa Coleman." The name moved through the crowd with a force no accusation had carried. People searched. Screens lit. My official portrait appeared in strangers' hands. Court articles. Ethics panels. Sentencing reform hearings. Judicial conference photographs. The woman who had been reduced to evidence now returned in fragments of public record. Officer Hayes looked at the phones. At me. At Officer Martin. Then back at the bag. For the first time I saw fear touch him. Not full fear. Not yet. Just the first cold finger of consequence at the back of his neck. I did not feel triumph. That surprises people when I tell it. They expect satisfaction. But the moment was not satisfying. It was clarifying. The same crowd that had suspected me now softened toward me because a title had made my humanity legible. That should trouble anyone honest enough to sit with it. What about the woman with no robe? What about the woman with no official portrait? What about the woman whose name cannot be searched into respect? Officer Hayes cleared his throat and said rank did not place anyone above the law. He aimed the sentence at the crowd because he needed them back. I agreed. I said no one is above the law. Not me. Not you. The words were quiet. They landed anyway. Officer Martin looked toward the market building where 3 black cameras were mounted under the awning. Then toward the office tower across the street. Then toward the cruiser camera. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to understand that the scene had become larger than Hayes could manage. Hayes told him to secure my vehicle. Martin did not move immediately. Hayes repeated the order. Martin stepped toward the sedan but stopped near the passenger door and looked inside without touching anything. His shoulders stiffened. Later, his testimony would describe what he saw. The placement of the bag did not match Hayes's stated recovery. The passenger seat items had shifted in a way that suggested disturbance after the initial stop. The body camera angle from Hayes would show something even worse. A brief downward movement near his own pocket before he leaned into my vehicle. But in that moment, all we had was silence. Heat. Phones. A federal judge in cuffs. A police officer trying to hold a collapsing story upright with the same hands that had built it. The store manager came outside. A small, nervous man in a green vest. He said their security office could preserve footage. Hayes snapped that no one was to interfere. The manager retreated half a step, but did not go back inside. The reporter asked if footage showed the search. Hayes told her to back away. She did, but her phone remained raised. Someone in the crowd said the cameras cover the whole lot. Another person said the office tower has cameras too. The lie had entered a place where walls had eyes. Hayes understood it then. I saw him understand. And that was the first true turn of the day. Not when the crowd learned my name. Not when I said I served on the bench. The turn came when Officer Hayes realized the world he had counted on was not empty. It had recorded him. It had time-stamped him. It had watched his hands. He walked toward me and lowered his voice again. This time the contempt was gone. In its place was warning. He said I should be careful about making accusations I could not prove. I looked at him. My wrist still locked behind me. My car still open. My coffee still melting into watery brown inside the cup holder. I said I have made no accusation. He blinked. I said I am only waiting for the evidence. That was when he stopped smiling. That was when he stopped smiling. The expression disappeared so quietly that most people missed it. His mouth stayed almost the same. His shoulders stayed square. His uniform stayed perfect beneath the dying sunlight. But something behind his eyes retreated. Something that had been comfortable inside the lie suddenly felt the floor shift. I had seen that look before. Not on police officers often. More often on witnesses when a document they forgot existed was placed on the record. On executives when an email chain appeared on a screen. On attorneys when a timeline they had built with confidence developed one impossible minute. It is a particular kind of fear. Not fear of truth exactly. Fear of traceable truth. Fear with a paper trail. Fear with a camera angle. Fear with metadata. Officer Hayes looked past me toward the market roof. Then toward the office tower. Then toward the people still recording. His voice rose again because volume is the first shelter of a man losing control. He told everyone to stop interfering. He told them this was official police business. He told the reporter to step back or risk obstruction. She stepped back, but she did not lower the phone. The store manager stood near the sliding doors and hugged his clipboard to his chest as though it were a shield. Officer Martin had returned to the front of my car and was staring at the passenger seat with an expression that told me he wanted distance from whatever had just happened there. The cuffs pressed into my wrists. My fingers had gone slightly numb. I shifted my weight and Hayes snapped at me again. Do not move. I went still. That was the strangest part. Even after the crowd knew my name. Even after the cameras were mentioned. Even after the story had begun rotting in his hands. He still needed obedience from my body. That was the last small kingdom he controlled. My wrists. My stance. My permission to move. Can you feel how thin power becomes when it has to keep proving itself through commands? I looked at the reflection of myself in the cruiser window. A federal judge. A daughter. A woman in a Navy suit. Hands locked behind her back in a grocery store parking lot, while strangers learned her worth through search results. I thought of every defendant who had stood before me and tried to explain how fast a normal day could become a criminal record. I thought of every family member who had looked at the floor while a prosecutor described a loved one through the worst sentence ever written about them. I thought of how many people never get the luxury of being revealed as respectable. The second patrol supervisor arrived 15 minutes later. Sergeant Linda Morales stepped out of her vehicle with a face that had already decided to be careful. She was older than Hayes. Shorter, gray at the temples, eyes sharp. Her gaze moved once across the scene and collected everything. The crowd, the raised phones, my cuffs, the evidence bag, Hayes standing too close to it, Martin standing too far from it, the open doors of my sedan, the security cameras fixed above us like patient witnesses. She asked Hayes for a summary. He gave her one. It was clean. Too clean. Suspicious vehicle. Nervous subject. Consent search. Narcotics recovered. Subject detained. He said it with the rhythm of rehearsed legality. Sergeant Morales listened without interruption. Then she looked at me. Judge Coleman. Her voice was neutral, not apologetic, not performative. Neutral in the way experienced professionals become neutral when every word may one day be examined. I nodded once. She asked whether I needed medical attention. I said no. She asked whether the cuffs were too tight. I said yes. Hayes said I had been moving. Sergeant Morales looked at him for 1 second, then told Martin to loosen them. Martin did. The relief was small but immediate. Blood returned to my fingers in painful sparks. I thanked him. He looked ashamed. That stayed with me. Shame is not innocence, but it can be the first sign that a person still has a functioning door inside them. Sergeant Morales asked whether I had identified myself before or after the recovery of the alleged narcotics. I said after. Hayes interrupted and said I had attempted to use status to influence the investigation. Sergeant Morales did not turn toward him. She only raised one hand slightly. He stopped. The smallest bureaucratic gesture. More effective than anger. More dangerous than shouting. She asked if I consented to the search. I said I asked whether I was free to leave. She wrote that down. Hayes said probable cause developed. She asked what specific facts established probable cause before entry into the vehicle. His jaw worked once. He said suspicious conduct. She asked him to define it. He said I appeared evasive. She asked how. He said I refused to answer basic questions. I said I answered my name and stated I did not possess contraband and requested clarification on whether I was detained. The reporter caught every word. So did the phones. So did Sergeant Morales. She turned toward Hayes and asked whether his body camera had remained active during the entire encounter. He said yes. Too quickly. Martin looked down. The whole parking lot seemed to inhale. Sergeant Morales asked dispatch to preserve all body camera footage and all cruiser footage immediately. Then she asked the store manager whether Riverfront Market maintained external surveillance. He nodded. She instructed him to preserve footage from every camera facing the parking lot beginning 30 minutes before initial contact. Hayes took one step forward. Sergeant. She turned to him slowly. Not now. 2 words. Quiet. Devastating. He stopped. I watched his face and understood that his real arrest began there. Not legally. Not publicly. But internally. The first cell door was the realization that procedure had turned away from protecting him and begun surrounding him. Sergeant Morales told Martin to secure the evidence without further handling. She requested another unit to transport it directly for controlled intake. She photographed its position. She photographed the vehicle. She photographed the interior. She photographed my cuffs. She photographed everything Hayes had thought would remain described only by him. Documentation is a merciless thing when it is honest. It does not care who feels embarrassed. It does not flatter authority. It simply remembers. The crowd had grown quieter. The early evening light had turned amber. The market sign glowed red above the doors. A breeze moved through the lot and lifted the corner of my receipt on the passenger seat. That small white paper fluttered like it wanted to testify. I was uncuffed at 6:17 p.m. I know the exact time because Sergeant Morales said it aloud for the camera before Officer Martin removed the metal from my wrists. The marks remained. 2 red half circles pressed into my skin. I rubbed them gently and felt nothing dramatic. No release. No victory. Only the strange exhaustion of a person who had been forced to become evidence in her own life. Sergeant Morales said I was not under arrest at that time. At that time. Legal words always carry hidden rooms. I asked whether I was free to leave. She said yes. Then she paused and said I would likely be contacted by investigators. I said I understood. Hayes stared at the ground. He did not apologize. I had not expected him to. Men like him rarely apologize at the scene. Apology requires acceptance of reality. He was still negotiating with it. Before I left, I walked to my passenger side and looked inside the car. My coffee had tipped slightly in the cup holder. My groceries were disarranged. My blazer had fallen to the floor. Nothing was destroyed, yet everything felt touched. That is the part people often miss about illegal intrusion. Even when nothing breaks, something has been entered. Your space. Your name. Your ordinary day. I closed the door softly. The sound was final in a way I could not explain. The young reporter called my name. Judge Coleman. I turned. Her face held a question every camera wanted answered. What do you want people to know? I looked at the phones. At the market windows. At Hayes. At Martin. at Sergeant Morales standing beside the evidence bag with her gloves on. Then I said, "Facts, do not panic." The reporter blinked. I said, "The facts will be reviewed." Then I got into my car and drove away beneath a sky that had begun turning violet at the edges. I did not cry until I reached my chambers. I want to be honest about that. Calm is not the absence of pain. Composure is not proof that humiliation failed to enter you. I sat in my office high above the city while the windows reflected my face back at me. I placed my court badge on the desk. I looked at the seal, the eagle, the words. The symbols that tell the public law is bigger than fear. And for a moment, I felt the full violence of what almost happened. Not physical violence. Something colder. A record built from a planted bag. A headline before a hearing. A mugshot before a fact. A career questioned. A name poisoned. A lifetime of discipline dragged into public suspicion by a man who thought the parking lot had no memory. My phone would not stop vibrating. Clerks. Colleagues. My sister. Reporters. The chief judge. I let most of it go unanswered. I washed my wrists in the private restroom attached to chambers and watched the red marks darken beneath the water. Then I stood there with my hands on the sink and breathed until my face became my own again. That night the first clips appeared online. Not the whole truth. Never the whole truth at first. Just fragments. Hayes holding the bag. Hayes saying my life was over. Me standing still. The crowd whispering my name. People argued immediately. Some said he had done his job. Some said I was receiving special treatment because I was a judge. Some said the video proved nothing. Some said my calmness looked suspicious. That one almost made me laugh. Suspicious when afraid. Suspicious when calm. Suspicious when silent. Suspicious when articulate. Suspicion can be a room with no exits when people build it around you. By midnight, the judiciary issued a brief statement confirming my identity and saying the matter had been referred to appropriate authorities. By morning, the city knew. By noon, the country had begun feeding on it. But the true story did not happen online. It happened in rooms without cameras. Evidence rooms. Conference rooms. Internal affairs offices. Federal investigative suites with gray carpets and bad coffee. It happened on screens where timestamps moved 1 second at a time. The riverfront market footage came first. Camera 3 showed my sedan arriving at 4:42 p.m. I stepped out, locked the door, entered the store. Camera 7 showed Officer Hayes entering the lot 12 minutes later. He parked 2 rows away. He did not approach immediately. He sat in his cruiser. Camera 4 showed him exit. Walk near my sedan. Look through the windows. Return to his cruiser. That mattered. Then came the office tower footage. Wider angle. Higher view. At 5:06 p.m., I returned to my vehicle. Hayes approached before I opened the driver door fully. The first conversation began. Then came the body camera. I watched it only once. Federal investigators offered to summarize it. I asked to see it. Not because I needed to torture myself. Because truth deserves to be faced directly when your name has been placed inside a lie. The footage shook slightly as Hayes approached me. His voice was calmer at first than I remembered. Mine sounded almost distant. He asked questions. I answered. I asked whether I was free to leave. He did not answer. He ordered me to step away. Then came the search. The body camera did not show everything because his torso blocked the passenger side. But audio recorded the rustle. The pause. A faint snap. The office tower camera filled in what his body tried to hide. His right hand went near his pocket before he leaned into my car. When he withdrew, it was empty. Seconds later, he emerged with the bag. The sequence was not ambiguous. It was not perfect like fiction. Real evidence rarely is. But it was enough. More than enough. Investigators found more. A gap in his written report. A dispatch note entered after the recovery, but written as though it preceded it. Prior complaints against Hayes that had been administratively closed. Traffic stops with missing footage. Searches that produced small quantities of drugs under unusually similar circumstances. People who had taken pleas because fighting would have cost more than surrender. That was when the case stopped being about me. That was when the floor opened under an entire history. Did you think justice was only one dramatic reveal? Did you think the story ended when a judge was recognized in a parking lot? No. The real horror was quieter. It had names, dates, case numbers, mothers, sons. A warehouse worker who lost custody for 9 months. A nursing student who accepted probation to keep her scholarship from collapsing further. A grandfather whose public defender never received complete camera footage. One by one, their files returned to the table, not as old paperwork, as living damage. Federal prosecutors moved carefully. They had to. The public wanted speed. Speed is emotionally satisfying. It is also where weak cases are born. I knew that better than anyone. So I worked. I heard my docket. I wrote opinions. I entered the courtroom each morning beneath the same seal. Some attorneys looked at me with new softness. Others avoided eye contact. Defendants looked at me differently too. Maybe they wondered if I understood more now. The truth is I had always understood. But understanding from the bench is not the same as feeling cuffs close around your own wrists. That experience did not make me fair. Fairness was already my duty. It made me more unwilling to let routine language hide human consequence. The indictment came on a Monday morning in November. Rain pressed against the courthouse windows. The city below looked washed and colorless. I was reviewing a sentencing brief when my clerk knocked once and entered with the expression of someone carrying history. "It is filed." That was all she said. United States versus Derek Allen Hayes. Civil rights violations. Obstruction. Falsification of records. Evidence tampering. Witness deprivation under color of law. Multiple counts tied not only to my stop, but to prior incidents federal investigators had reopened. The maximum exposure reached 25 years. Headlines took that number and ran with it. 25 years. The officer who said my life was over. Facing 25 years. People called it karma. I did not. Karma is too easy. It makes injustice sound mystical. This was not mysticism. This was labor. Preservation notices. Subpoenas. Metadata. Witness interviews. Chain of custody. Administrative courage from people who could have looked away. A young officer who eventually told the truth. A store manager who saved footage despite being warned not to interfere. A reporter who kept recording when intimidation entered the scene. A supervisor who understood that procedure must serve truth or it becomes costume. At the arraignment, Hayes looked smaller. That is what I remember. Not defeated. Not sorry. Smaller. His suit did not fit as cleanly as his uniform had. His lawyer stood beside him and entered a plea of not guilty. The courtroom was packed. I was not there. I would never preside over anything connected to the case. I watched nothing live. I read only what was appropriate for me to read. Boundaries matter, especially when the injured person knows the law well enough to be tempted by certainty. The process belonged to the court, not to my anger, not to public appetite, not to the poetic symmetry of the title people kept repeating online. The trial took place months later in another district before another judge. By then the city had learned about the others. Their faces appeared in long-form reporting. Their stories were told with a care they had not received at the time of arrest. The nursing student spoke about sitting in a jail cell and calculating how many clinical hours she would miss. The warehouse worker described his son asking why police said Daddy had bad things in the car. The grandfather brought the shoes he had been wearing the night he was stopped because he remembered staring at them while officers searched his truck. Ordinary details. That is where suffering lies. Not in slogans. In missed shifts. In court fees. In children learning fear too early. In the quiet rearrangement of a life after someone with authority lies well. Officer Martin testified under immunity. His voice shook at first, then steadied. He said he had seen enough that day to question the recovery. He said Hayes told him to shut up and learn how the job works. He said he had failed to report earlier concerns because Hayes was respected in the department and because younger officers knew what happened to people who made trouble. The courtroom went still. That sentence reached beyond him. Systems survive through fear disguised as loyalty, through silence disguised as professionalism, through paperwork that makes cowardice look administrative. Then came the video. Jurors watched the parking lot. The search. The hand near the pocket. The bag. My wrists. Hayes saying my life was over. I was not in the courtroom, but I later read that one juror closed her eyes when the line played. Maybe she heard what I heard. Not just threat. Certainty. The confidence of a man who believed he could author reality. The defense argued angles. Shadows. Misinterpretation. They suggested the bag had been missed earlier. They questioned motives. They implied publicity had pressured investigators. That is their role. The system must allow defense even for those accused of violating it. I believe that. I believed it even then. But cross-examination is not magic. It cannot erase a timeline that keeps answering back. The jury deliberated for 9 hours. Guilty on the major counts. Guilty on evidence tampering. Guilty on obstruction. Guilty on deprivation of rights. When the verdict was read, the courtroom did not erupt. At least not according to those who were there. It went quiet. That kind of quiet again. But different this time. Not the silence of suspicion. The silence of record becoming permanent. Sentencing came later. Hayes received 25 years. The number everyone had whispered became real. I read the judgment alone in chambers. The city was bright that day. Spring light on glass buildings. River shining like a blade. I set the document down and felt no joy. Please understand that. I did not feel sadness for him either. I felt the solemn weight of consequence finally landing where it belonged. Prison is not a punchline. A sentence is not a celebration. But accountability is not cruelty. It is the price a society pays to remind power that people are not props. That evidence is not clay. That a badge is not permission to manufacture guilt. The more important reforms came after. The department entered a federal oversight agreement. Search documentation changed. Body cameras had to remain unobstructed during vehicle searches. Evidence recovery required dual officer confirmation whenever practical. Closed complaints involving Hayes were reopened for independent review. Dozens of cases were audited. Some convictions were vacated. Some pleas were withdrawn. Some people received apologies that arrived too late, but still mattered because the record finally spoke their names correctly. Riverfront Market installed new camera signage. The store manager who saved the footage became uncomfortable with praise and told reporters he had only done what was right. The reporter won an award and used her speech to say the camera did not create truth. It preserved it long enough for people to stop denying it. Officer Martin left the department and later joined a state oversight agency. Sergeant Morales testified before a legislative committee with the same careful neutrality she had brought to the parking lot. She said policy is only as moral as the people willing to enforce it upward. I wrote that sentence down, not for an opinion, for myself. 6 months after sentencing, I spoke to a group of law students in the federal courthouse atrium. I had not planned to mention the case, but one student asked how a person stays calm when the system turns on them. The room changed after the question. Young faces, notebooks, hope, fear, all of them waiting for something useful. I could have given them doctrine. I could have spoken about motions and remedies and constitutional safeguards. Instead, I looked through the tall windows at the city moving beyond the courthouse steps. I told them calm is not surrender. Calm is architecture. You build it over years so that when someone tries to drag you into chaos, you still have a room inside yourself where facts can sit untouched. I told them dignity does not guarantee protection, but it can preserve clarity. I told them the law is not holy because it is written. It becomes worthy only when human beings choose truth over convenience again and again and again. The students wrote quickly. One young woman in the front row had tears in her eyes. I recognized something in her face. The old question, do I belong in rooms like this? I wanted to tell her yes. But belonging is not gifted by rooms. It is carried into them by people who refuse to let the door define their worth. After the talk, I returned to my courtroom. The afternoon docket was ordinary. A contract dispute, a motion hearing, a sentencing status conference. Ordinary work. Sacred work because ordinary justice is what keeps society from needing miracles. When court ended, I stood alone for a moment behind the bench. The room was empty. The flag was still. Light fell across the council tables. I thought about the parking lot again. The heat, the bag, the phones. Hayes telling me my life was over. He had been wrong about that. But not because I was powerful. Not because I wore a robe. Not because people eventually recognized my name. He was wrong because lies have weaknesses even when liars have authority. They fear time. They fear records. They fear patient witnesses. They fear the one person in the scene who refuses to perform the panic they need. I walked out through the marble corridor as evening settled over the courthouse. Outside, the city glowed softly. Cars moved along the river. People carried groceries, coffee, briefcases. Children tugged at sleeves. Life continuing in all its fragile, ordinary beauty. I paused at the top of the courthouse steps and looked toward the direction of Riverfront Market. Somewhere there the asphalt had cooled. The cameras had been replaced. The crowd was gone. But the lesson remained. Justice is not loud when it is strongest. It does not always arrive with applause. Sometimes it arrives through a preserved file, a reluctant witness, A supervisor who says not now. A timestamp no one can bully. A woman in cuffs who knows that facts do not panic. Facts wait. And when the world is finally forced to look at them, they speak.